Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to In the Spotlight. My name is Seamus Corry, and you're very welcome along this afternoon to this week's episode. I would like to firstly thank everyone for their kind subscription and their kind following in terms of, the comments that you've left, my subscribers who have subscribed both to my YouTube channel and my Spotify channel, and I thank you for all your comments. In the Spotlight is a series where, in my travels as a wellbeing consultant, I come across some amazing individuals doing amazing work. And in the Spotlight, shines a spotlight on them, bringing them to the attention of the wider world. And I have before me today a wonderful, kind, caring individual with over 40 years of experience working in a consultancy framework. He is a writer, podcaster, fisherman, I believe, and we'll get to that
Uh,
a little bit later.
a fly
Writer,
fish.
life fisherman, and writer and author. He's also a podcaster, and producing some beautiful work, assisting some amazing clients, and delivering some work around change and shift and how that happens, occurs, and how we navigate through that in our own lives. It's my pleasure to welcome Jeff Ikler to In the Spotlight this afternoon. Good morning, Jeff. And where in the world does this podcast episode find you this morning?
So I'm in New York City. It's about 10:20 in the morning, and I'm very pleased to be here sitting and talking with you. I remember finally when uh, we had the microphone reversed and uh, we got your story, which was fantastic. Never planned to actually tape that as an episode that day, but it was too good to pass up. So I'm really pleased to be here and to be talking with you again.
Absolutely. And for those who want to listen to that podcast episode, it's number 333 on the episode list on Jeff's website. Check it out, Getting Unstuck. It's wonderful and a wonderful series that Jeff has delivered in terms of his own podcast series. Jeff, um, I know a little bit about you. And we've spent some time chatting, and I think over the past year we initially connected through LinkedIn, right? And we initially connected through our mutual friends, Angela DeMarco and Dana Sardano, and a big shout out to them this afternoon for putting us together. Of Phenom Publishing. But for those who don't know you, Jeff, who want to get to know you a little bit better, would you, mind sharing a little bit of your own background and experience with us this afternoon and sharing with us who Jeff Ikler is?
Yeah. So, Seamus, uh, I guess, if I were going to say succinctly what my purpose is, uh, it's to help people think differently.
Mm,
And I started uh, almost 50 years ago as a high school history teacher,
yeah, love
uh,
that.
right out, right out of college, and high school U.S. history teacher in government. And I did that for a number of years, and then I went into educational publishing, where I helped create textbooks and technology for kids in K through 12. And then I helped develop professional development for the educators, for the teachers and the administrators who were standing in front of those kids. And when I retired from that, a colleague of mine at the time was an adjunct university professor, and she said, "Hey, our college has a free hour on their radio show. Do you want to do a podcast together?" And she and I had worked together at the publishing company. We were very familiar with each other, and um, we started a podcast, and it was amazingly easy. I just I love the microphone, and I love talking with guests such as yourself.
Mm.
And I'm now in the seventh year of the show.
Wow.
Um, and
Jeff, I stand on the shoulder of giants. I feel a little bit meager and a little bit infantile in terms of my two shows. 7 years, Jeff. That's amazing.
well, it's gone through three iterations, Seamus. It was
Mm.
the first 2 years we focused on change because her focus was organizational change and my focus was individual change.
Mm.
And she was doing a lot of organizational change work in her university work. And as a certified executive coach, I was doing obviously a lot of change with individuals. So we put that together and we worked for a couple of years. And um, and then she said one day, "Hey, what would you think if we talked about change in the context of our past background, which was education, and we write a book together?" And I knew a lot of people in the publishing world from my background, and we were able to co-author a book, which is called "Shifting: How Leaders Can Create a Culture of Change," and we created that. And so to support the book, we shifted the focus of the podcast. This was like what I like to say is the second iteration of the podcast, and we focused on education and how to support educators and ultimately kids in their classrooms. And we did that for a couple of years, and then her consulting business and her university uh, work had taken off so strongly that she had to kind of step out of doing the weekly podcast. So I had it all to myself. This was probably in year 4
Mm.
that that she left. And so I did some soul searching, Seamus, because at the time, I had been in education in one form or another for over 40 years. And um, I was really dismayed at the slow pace of change in American education. We were just not moving away from the industrial model of education. And I saw so many times that we were going through these incremental shifts in education. One of my guests actually said it best. He said a lot of educators um, are trying to do the old things better as opposed to doing better things. Trying to do the old things better as opposed to doing better things. And I paint with a pretty broad brush here. I didn't see that we were preparing kids to be critical thinkers, problem solvers, collaborators in the 21st century. All that to say, I thought, okay, if I'm still the host of this, now I'm the solo host of this podcast, I'm going to focus where I want to focus. And I shifted the podcast a third time. And I focused on curiosity because, again, my focus was to help people think differently. And for the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, the focus of the podcast has been very eclectic. I find individuals who I think have interesting things to say, such as yourself. And um, I try to bring people to the microphone that my listeners may not have heard from before. My most popular show ever was with a fly fishing guide in New Mexico.
Wow.
And I did that show because I love fly fishing.
Yeah.
And I thought, if we can expose some people to that sport and that environment, great. But the amazing thing is, he didn't talk about fly fishing that much. He talked about leadership and how he approaches clients on the water. And I think that's why it took off. So the show is very eclectic. It's pretty energizing for me because I get to do something almost different every week.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get that as a fellow podcaster. I absolutely get that. I think it's very much the Field of Dreams kind of model, right? Jeff, where in the movie The Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner was encouraged to build a baseball pitch in the middle of a cornfield,
Yeah.
and when he inquired as to why he should build a baseball pitch in the middle of a cornfield, he was just told, build it and they will come, and I
And they
think
will come.
we build a podcast, don't we? We build a series, and out of nowhere, interesting people start to show up that deserve a space, that deserve a platform. Just in the same way, you and I got together, and you podcasted me, and I've returned the favor, and turned the mic over on you, and it's such an interesting process, isn't it?
Oh, it's very interesting. I get to meet a lot of um, very unique people who
Yeah.
have interesting things to say. It's never dull putting it together. And I think because the show is so varied, from week to week, I interviewed a woman who treks in Nepal. I interviewed a gentleman who wrote a memoir about his dad in World War II. I just interviewed two gentlemen who have a very unique way to teach mathematics. I still do shows on education if it's really something unique, if it's really going
Mm.
to turn the page. And I've done a number of shows where I'll actually take the microphone with me to historical sites because there's nothing like visiting history and talking about what happened when you're right there in the middle of it.
Yeah, and you, if I'm right, you've brought all that together in a beautiful package of Quitico consultancy, which
Yes.
which has I suppose galvanized your experience, and am I right in saying that you now support individual clients who have difficulty with change or moving forward, or where is that in terms of a process for you, Jeff?
Yeah.
And, and
So
can I also say, Quitico, I love the name. Am I pronouncing it right?
well, it's actually Quetico,
Quetico. Okay.
Quetico, and uh, no one knows exactly where the name came from, but
Beautiful.
Quetico is a Canadian provincial park. It's a wilderness park
Yeah.
in southwestern Ontario.
Yeah.
I used to visit Quetico every summer when I was teaching. When school would let out, I would go to Quetico with my brother and some of my teaching buddies, and we would basically do wilderness camping for a week.
Oh,
There were
wow.
no motors allowed. It's very remote, and you have to carry in whatever food you want in addition to any fish that you catch. But it was a place of great challenge,
Hmm.
and I say that because some of the when you're trying to get from one lake to another uh, overland, you're using portages, and some of the portages were quite long. They could be a mile long, and because we went there in late spring, early summer, the snow was just melting up there, and they would
Yeah.
be very muddy. They would be bug infested, and you're walking with a canoe on your shoulders and a pack on your back. So it was a challenge, and sometimes it was very challenging to canoe great distances, but it was also a place of tremendous reflection. I
Hmm.
just love being on the water and forgetting everything else going on and just about, thinking about my life and what I want to do with my life and that. So I named my coaching company Quetico Coaching because it embodies those two things of challenge and reflection. And I work with individuals, I think fairly similar to what you're doing, helping them to find out what it is that they want, what's holding them back, and to move forward in life.
Absolutely. And I love the analogy of going from one lake to another where the portage is in between. I love that. And I also love the imagery that you evoke in terms of, yeah, it's muddy, it's, you know, insect infested, and you've got a backpack and you've got a canoe, and you've got all literally the weight of the world on your shoulders, right? But you also equally don't carry that canoe alone. You're carrying that canoe as part of a team, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
about working in unison. It's about working in tandem to deliver the outcome, which in this case is getting to the next lake, without being overly savage to death, bitten to death, and getting there in one piece, right?
exactly.
Because
And
because I can imagine with the snows beginning to thaw, and it's early spring, right? You're surrounded by the challenge of nature. I presume being a natural park, and those challenges in Canada or Ontario would include, animals, birds, insects. And I'm thinking bears. Bears are probably a part of the landscape in quite a.
never saw a bear. Don't know if bears exist. There are animals. We saw quite a few moose and obviously different birds. Some of the most rewarding parts of the trip were sitting around the campfire at night
Yeah.
when I was talking with my buddies. And one night, um, we looked up and we actually saw the Northern Lights. It only
Wow.
happened once, but it was spectacular.
Wow.
And I can still see them now. So yeah, it was a great experience, and I wanted to bring that duality to my coaching, where it's both challenging and it's reflective. And so I've been doing that, since I left publishing.
Yeah. So I suppose that brings me to my next question. Um, how do you get people from one lake to another? How do you get people to shift, to move, to change? And I presume, is it an invitation? Is it a reflection? Is it a mindset shift? Is it a change of direction? What's the magic, Jeff?
Well, the magic, I guess, is learning how to listen and learning how to ask powerful questions.
Yeah.
And by powerful questions, these are questions that are open-ended.
Yeah.
And it's really, I look at coaching the way you would look at an onion, that there are, when you cut an onion in half, you see the layers of an onion. And what somebody comes to coaching for is never that outer layer. They may say that's what it's for.
Mm.
I'm trying to find this, or I'm worried about this, but it's really never about that. And the
Yeah.
the process of coaching is to try to get people to peel back those layers of the onion. And you do that by asking a lot of questions and by listening. And the challenge is not to offer direction. And I came from the publishing world. I was a senior executive in the publishing world where people expected me to provide direction. And so I had to make that shift when I became a coach of not leading the client, but helping the client to lead the client.
Yeah.
And it's a very different mindset.
Yeah, it's a form of discernment, I presume. It's a form of divination, maybe to some degree.
Say it again.
It's a form of discernment or divination. Like you would divine for water. You,
Uh,
you, you're looking for where the energy is, right? You're looking for where the flow is, or where the flow might be blocked. So there's almost, would you say, a kind of almost an emotional, or dare I say it, a spiritual element to that process.
abs- Absolutely. And looking is a good word, because a lot of what you gain from a client, you gain by watching how they answer and
Yeah.
watching, listening for when they hesitate, and 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 then calling. Sometimes you have to call them on it. You stopped here. What was going on when you were talking about that? So it's it was some of the most rewarding work that I ever did. And I wish that as a leader in the publishing company, I had known the coaching skills, because I would have led differently than I did.
Yeah.
I would have led with the intent to develop people as opposed to just moving the work along, if that's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, 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 and I suppose it goes back to the analogy you've already mentioned. It's a question of what you experience traditionally was, and trying to do the old things better, rather than trying to do better things, which
Exactly.
comes up time and time again, and for that, it's a question of is it a question of awareness then, Jeff? Is it a question of knowledge, awareness, or a mixture of all that plus reflection?
Yeah, and I think another ingredient would be honesty, self-honesty. You
Yeah.
know, that you're helping people, to actually see themselves and to break through whatever layers they've got there that, the internal critic is using to protect them,
Mm.
and so a lot of it is coming to terms with yourself. And it's I know from my own experience, because I've sat on that side of the microphone as a client, and it can take a certain amount of time to to break through the barriers, the internal barriers that we set up.
Mm.
But the first thing, the major thing that I applaud people for is they've come to the discussion.
Yeah. They've
You
turned
know,
up. Yeah.
they showed up, right?
Yeah.
And that's obviously saying something. There was something in, going on that they knew wasn't serving them, and they wanted to shift it.
Yeah. And while they may not be sure what it is they want shifted, I presume through the process of reflection, open-ended questioning, ongoing support, they get to a place where they, as it were, reveal the layers of the onion to
There
get
you
to
there you go.
what's
There you go.
what,
Right.
what where it really is at.
Right.
And Jeff, uh, like, I'm glad I was sitting down when I read this on your own website, right? But according to a recent survey, yeah, a Gallup statistic on your own website, it estimates that over 70% of workers working currently in the United States of Great America who are not engaged with the work that they do, or just are completely disengaged from the work that they do. Is that still the case, Jeff?
I mean, I haven't looked the statistic in recently, but in talking to people, that certainly seems to be prevalent, that they're doing the work,
Yeah.
and they may be engaged to a degree because of who they're doing the work with. But what I found from personal experience and in talking to people, what often makes a huge difference is who you're working for. Who
Oh,
is the leader?
yeah.
What has the leader set down that's important? And if it's only about metrics, if it's only about we've got to sell X, um, that's not going to lead to superior performance. And I'll tell you, I have an anecdotal story. At one point in my career, I was managing the social studies department at the publishing company. I was in charge of producing history, sociology, economics, psychology textbooks, and
Yeah.
I had a large department. And one day, in talking to the entire department, I mentioned that we had sold X million dollars worth of textbooks,
Yeah.
thinking that they would be pleased with that. No reaction. Well, the reaction I got was people sitting there with their arms crossed,
Oh,
because that's not why they were in it. That's not why they were working for an educational publishing company. That's not why they were creating social studies textbooks.
yeah.
So I had to reflect on what was I missing? What is it? What is their purpose? And what I came back with instead of talking about sales, I talked about the books, the number of books that kids carry that you created.
In their school bags, going to school every
Yeah,
day, or at school, opening up and reading every single day.
right. I didn't talk about money. I talked about the number of kids who are carrying your books. Completely different reaction on the part of the people.
Yeah.
Because what they were interested in was kids learning. The money, yeah, they understood the economics. That's not what motivated them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the shift for them.
That was the shift.
That was the shift.
But I had to recognize I wasn't getting through. My point being, leaders help determine the purpose
Yeah.
that people are working for, help emphasize the purpose that people are working for. And when you don't hit upon that, you're gonna have disengagement.
Yeah. And I heard an old analogy when I once worked as a residential childcare worker, working in residential childcare, and it was this: the manager in each of our units creates the culture in each of
There
our
you go.
homes.
There you go.
So the manager sets the culture. The leader sets the culture, and the staff, align to that. And if they don't align to that, well, they need to choose something else because this is the culture.
You're right.
And very similarly, in terms of the work that you do, in supporting our leaders and supporting our those, who have influence, the culture's got to be right, Jeff, right?
Absolutely. We talk a lot in our book, shifting how leaders can create a culture of change. We talked about emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And one of the gentlemen who really pushed emotional intelligence or brought it to the forefront was Daniel Goleman. And he, in one of his books, he said more than 30% of how people feel about work, more than 30% of how people feel about work comes directly from the result of the leader's mood.
Oh,
So if I'm working in an
there it
environment,
is.
if I'm working in an environment that's the leader is setting a collaborative tone, a positive tone,
Yeah.
we're working to help kids or whatever it is that you're doing, that mood translates into energy. If the mood is bad, it's going to impact and it's going to contribute to that 70% of disengagement.
Yeah.
I think that's a powerful
Huge.
concept.
Huge. So you've got 70% of working population being part of the culture. That really 70% of the workforce, according to Gallup, and maybe change and maybe different, let's use 70% as a round-up figure, are presenting themselves for work but disengaging from work at the same time. So it's a
That's
form of
right.
presenteeism, isn't it?
Yeah. And the number one reason people leave companies, leave organizations is because of the leader.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had similar personal experiences that where I've left organizations not because the job wasn't right, but because I was working for somebody that was rubbish,
There you go. There you
that
go.
didn't align to my own mission, vision, and value and purpose.
Right. Leadership is a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not just about making it happen. It's about making it happen right.
Yeah.
And leadership is leadership. I once talked to an assistant principal. I did a lot of consulting when I left publishing, and I worked in school districts, and I was talking to an assistant principal who could not make the shift from being a literature teacher to being a school administrator. She still wanted to be the literature person in her building, and her teachers were rebelling against that. And I said to her one day, I said, instead of focusing on literature, what if you focused 90% of your energy on developing your people and helping your people to do the work that they have to do?
Mm.
She looked at me like I had three heads because she could not make that shift to focus on the people doing the work. That's a big thrust in our book is that it's a big failure of leadership in many companies that they're not focusing enough attention on the people doing the work. They're focused solely on the work itself,
Yeah, and the numbers,
on
uh,
the numbers.
and the data, and the spreadsheets, and the bottom line.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the profit margin, and all those various elements that go to make a profitable business, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Jeff, I want to ask you, and you've been doing this work for a considerable length of time, and it's something in terms of my own reflection, I reflect on quite um quite a lot. Do you think there was a watershed moment during the pandemic when there's been another seismic shift in how people are approaching work? Or is that size is that earthquake still happening? Is that shift still happening? Because you've got the reality, flexible work and hybrid work and fluid work, and people don't need to turn up in the same way. What's your opinion on that?
Well, uh, I guess not to sound like science of the obvious, but I think the fact that we were separated from each other physically,
Yeah.
you know, and teachers were separated from kids and kids were separated from kids, it had a major impact.
Mm.
And it's very interesting to me. I have a lot of friends like yourself whom I've never met physically.
No.
I only know you in this environment,
Mm.
right? It's not like we can do anything social, right? We can we can have a virtual beer together, I guess, but
We
it's not like
can. It's not the same. I
it's
can't
not the
buy.
same,
I can't buy you around, Jeff. You know what I mean? I can't
right?
buy you around. I can't give you a hug. I can't, chew the fat with you.
Right.
Yes, we can do it digitally, but it's not the same, right? It's not.
Yeah. And I think people, and you've probably read this, people are actually working longer hours virtually than they were before, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
And I know from I know from myself that I'm often at the desk at 5:30 in the morning.
yeah.
It's the first thing that I do. So I think that has been a shift, and I'm not sure all organizations have figured out how to overcome that
Mm.
because a lot of the strength when I was working in the publishing company, this was way before Zoom, way before the pandemic and everything. A lot of our strength came from our associations, came from our relationships. And yes, you can certainly have those, but I'll argue it's not the same.
No.
It just isn't the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you end up with it is a virtual form of isolation where you're not in the same room, as a person. You can't look into the whites of their eyes. You can't sense their feelings or emotions or where they're at, and you get that instead that digital screen, which is your window into their very soul, which is not the
Right.
same, right?
Right.
Which is not the same.
Right. Ironically, um, we were talking before about um, coming out of the election and what is it uh, what is it that people can do? Obviously, there are going to be people who accept the election, and there are going to be people who don't. I mean, they
Mm,
accept it, but they don't necessarily like it, and they're going to be disappointed by the results. And
mm,
how do you survive? How do you survive in an environment where you're that displeased and you're living in a virtual environment? And one of the things that has come out is that we have to find a way to strengthen the bonds with the people that we love.
Yeah.
right? The people that we have to hang out with them the best that we can, because otherwise, to your point, Seamus, we have this intense feeling of loneliness and isolation. And I know I've been trying to reach out to people because it's like it's almost like solitary confinement.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting in front of your computer working all day, you're reading articles about this and about that and the election, and people being disappointed. And it's not like you can go to the office next door and say, let's go out for lunch. We got to do something together here.
Yeah.
So that's a big first step, is that I think people have to find a way to strengthen those bonds with the people uh, that they love.
Yeah. Yeah. And physically reconnect with people in a real way. And to that end, Jeff, albeit we are, a couple of thousand miles apart, at different sides of the Atlantic Ocean, I welcome the day when I can sit in a coffee shop with you, my friend, and buy you a cappuccino or buy you a coffee of your choice.
Back
And
at you.
we can spend a couple of hours putting the world to rights, man. That's my goal. In the meantime, I'm satisfied with this particular arrangement where I still get to see you, I still get to speak to you, but hugs are a little bit difficult because of the distance involved, right? And I suppose
Absolutely.
there will be some people within that movement and within that transition to, as we move forward in the 21st century, as AI technology becomes more prevalent, and technology itself becomes more prevalent. Is there a greater likelihood and risk that people will become more isolated? And do we have to work harder, Jeff, in building those physical bonds with people to counteract the digital takeover?
Absolutely. When I do a podcast episode with somebody that I don't know, I usually have what I call a hello meeting
Yeah.
for 15 or 20 minutes. Um, the prospective guest and I will sit down, we'll co-create an agenda. Now I have a lot of people that say, yeah, go ahead, call me, let's do this. And I always come back with, can we do it by Zoom? Because the phone to me no longer is a great communication tool, because there's so much lost visually.
Yeah.
If I see the person, um, I'm gaining information, they're gaining information about me. And I know in some sense we've been isolated, but that's to me almost like desperation. I need to see the person.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What do you think, Jeff? And it may be an unfair question, but what do you think? And it's something I ask myself quite often in terms of the work that I do. But what in your opinion are some of the big blockages to that shift and that change? Is it down to a lack of listening? Is it down to a lack of reflection? Is it down to a lack of understanding or awareness? What are the big obstacles, the big blockages to shift change?
Are you talking, Seamus, are you talking in general, like when people come to coaching, what could be blocking them?
Yeah, what are the obstacles that people face?
Well, classic. There are two that immediately come to mind. One is they haven't turned the soil on their past. And I speak from experience that a lot of things, when I started studying my past, and this obviously comes from my background as a history teacher, a lot of things came to light that helped me clarify why I developed the way I developed. So what I try to do in my coaching is to try to help that person understand what were the major influencers on you as a person when you were growing up,
Mm,
and to listen to those. But very similar to that is some people get so stuck looking through the virtual trunk, the memorabilia trunk of
Yeah.
their life, that they can't get beyond it.
Yeah.
And I know in my own case, all my relatives, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everybody's passed on.
Yeah.
If I'm looking for answers, I can't go to them for answers anymore. But some people, to your question, get stuck because they want that security of the answers and they can't get it. Right. And they'll remain there wanting to find out things about their parents where there's no information to find out anymore.
Yeah. Because they're gone. They're
They're
deceased.
gone. They're
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just had a guest on the podcast, and this episode actually comes out next week. This is an anthropologist who wrote a book called Essential Questions. And these are questions, and they're in the book. She took a lot of time and built questions from the anthropological point of view that you should be asking your parents now. You should be asking your grandparents now,
Mm.
because one, it helps them understand their past, but it also helps you understand your past and how you developed. It's a wonderful book. It's very thought-provoking. And we often wait far too late. I know I did. I had many unanswered questions when my parents passed away, and now it's a void.
Yeah. And that's where the real sadness is, Jeff, isn't it? Where you cannot, for various physical reasons, get answers to those questions because
Yeah.
the individuals in question, are not there. Jeff, we're coming to the end. We've been speaking, would you believe, for nearly the bones of an hour. Um, and I feel that when I sit down with you, Jeff, time just evaporates into the stratosphere. That it just goes. I could speak to you all day, Jeff, and I think we have many stories to share, right? I think we
Yeah.
have
Very good.
we have a unique relationship and a wonderful friendship, and for anybody listening out there who in the UK, in America, or across the world who might pick up this podcast, what would be the one piece of advice you would give them if they're struggling internally with some dilemma or some change? What, what would you, how would you help them? How would you support them to kind of move?
So this may sound simplistic,
Mm.
but I would take the first step, and I would ask the person to identify 3 to 5 values that they know drives them,
Yeah,
that they know energizes them.
yeah,
3 to 5 values. And then to see, how are they living those values? Are they a 10 on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is I'm not living it at all, or 10 is I'm living it greatly? To measure how well they're living those. And then if they're not living those values, what is it that they feel is standing in their way? But I would definitely start with values. And and sometimes this the middle step can't be ignored. You have to say, okay, here's my value. I'm only at a 4 or a 5, and this is obviously relative, right? I'm at a 4 or a 5. What is it that I can do to push that to a 7, an 8, or a 9? Because a lot of times we find our way into coaching because we know internally what our values are, but we're not living towards them. Other things are blocking them, right? Other things are blocking our way.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, you know, to sum up, I think you're a wonderful coach. You're a wonderful human being. It's been a real pleasure to have you on in the spotlight this afternoon. For more information on Jeff, please check out his website, jeffekler.com. He also has, as I said, two a podcast series running, and you'll find all the information on there. You'll also find information on his website with regard to the book that he's mentioned. And I recommend that if you haven't got it in your library, go and buy a copy today and let Jeff and his co-authors become a bestseller for Christmas and make Jeff's Christmas. And that book is called Shifting, Creating a Culture of Change for Leaders in Schools. Jeff, it's been a real pleasure this afternoon, and thank you for being on.
Back at you, Seamus, anytime. And I look forward to one of us getting across the pond and doing it right.
Jeff, I feel 25 is going to be my year. I feel a visit to New York and Florida is in the offing. I feel there's big things coming. I have had a kind of spiritual awakening that I need to renew my passport for some reason, and so
very good.
I'm in the process of renewing my passport as we speak. So back at you, kiddo, and we will have that coffee. We will sit down and we will chew the grass in terms of putting the world to rights at some stage in the future.
Come to New York, you get 2 for 1 because Angela's 20 minutes, 30 minutes from us here.
Get in. That's a meeting I want to have. That's a conversation I want to have. That one should be recorded. Absolutely, 100%.
There you
Absolutely, 100%. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, my friend.